The morning he found his daughter unconscious on the kitchen floor, the turkey was still in the oven. That detail stayed with Arthur Flemming for a long time afterward, the smell of roasting meat filling the house, the timer on the stove counting down to 0, and his 8-year-old girl collapsed between the counter and the refrigerator, with her cheek pressed flat against the tile. He stood in the doorway for one full second before he understood what he was seeing. Then he was on his knees beside her, hand on her back, and she was breathing, he could feel it, but her skin was the color of old wax and she wouldn't wake up. The ambulance took 11 minutes. Arthur knew because he counted. He stood on the front porch of the house in Barrie, Ontario in his wool socks with the snow coming down sideways off Georgian Bay, and he counted every second from the moment he ended the 911 call to the moment the lights came around the corner of Maple Crescent. 11 minutes and 40 seconds to be exact. He would remember that number too. Cora, his daughter 8 years old, 3rd grade at Innisdale Public School, obsessed with horses and anything that came in the color orange, had been diagnosed with a heart condition called SVT when she was 4, supraventricular tachycardia. Her heart would sometimes forget how to keep its own rhythm and race to 200 beats a minute without warning. They had a plan for it. Medications, a cardiologist in Toronto named Dr. Ewan, who they saw every 6 months, a list of instructions laminated and stuck to the fridge door. Cora knew what to do when she felt it coming. Lie down, breathe slow, press the heel of her hand to her sternum. But she hadn't felt it coming that morning. She'd been making a cheese sandwich and then she was on the floor. Arthur rode in the back of the ambulance with her hand in his and tried not to think about how cold her fingers were. The paramedic, a young woman with red hair pulled back tight, was calm and professional and kept saying things like her pressure is stable and she's responding well, and Arthur kept nodding as if those sentences were landing somewhere. They weren't. He was somewhere else entirely. He was in the kitchen doorway again, frozen, watching a second pass that he would never get back. Cora's mother, Arthur's ex-wife Sandra, had left when Cora was 2. Not suddenly, not dramatically. She left of the way water leaves a glass left in the sun, slowly, then all at once. She lived in Vancouver now. She sent birthday cards and called it Christmas and had visited exactly twice since Cora started school. Arthur didn't carry bitterness about it anymore, or at least he'd stopped carrying it loudly. It was just the shape of things. He and Cora. That was the unit. He'd moved them both back to Barrie from Toronto 3 years earlier to be closer to his mother, Vera Flemming, who lived 20 minutes away in a house on Bayfield Street that still had his childhood bedroom intact. That had been the plan: family support, lower cost of living, a yard for Cora to run around in, a fresh start after the divorce. His mother was 68, healthy, sharp as a tack, and had been Cora's primary caretaker on the days Arthur worked long shifts at Simcoe County Infrastructure. Road maintenance and utility oversight, not glamorous but steady. It was a good arrangement. It had worked for 3 years. And then Vera had a hip fracture in November. She'd slipped on the back step during an early ice storm and landed badly. The surgery went fine. The surgeon said she'd make a full recovery, but the recovery itself took time, and she couldn't be on her feet much or drive. She was at her own house, managing with a cane and a rotating schedule of friends from her church. But the arrangement with Cora was over for the foreseeable future. Arthur rearranged everything he could. He took a reduction in hours at work. He enrolled Cora in an after-school program. He set up a network of backup pickups with 2 other parents from the class: Beverly Okafor, whose son was in Cora's class, and a retired teacher named Gordon who lived on their street and had offered more than once. It was patchwork. It held together most days, but it was patchwork. The Christmas dinner had been his idea. His mother was well enough to come over by then. Not cook, not stand, but sit at the table and be part of something. And Arthur had wanted to give Cora a real holiday. Roast turkey, the whole thing. He'd been preparing since the day before. Brine for the bird, homemade stuffing, butternut squash soup from scratch. He'd sent Cora to her room to watch a movie while he worked, which meant she'd gotten bored, wandered into the kitchen, decided to make herself a cheese sandwich, and her heart had started its terrible racing before she could call out to him. He had been in the basement getting an extra folding chair. The hospital kept her overnight. Her rhythm converted back on its own before they even got there, which the cardiologist on call said was actually a positive sign. It meant her heart was self-correcting, which was what they wanted. But they wanted to observe her. They adjusted one of her medications. Dr. Yun would want to see her in January. Arthur sat in the plastic chair beside her bed and watched her sleep and ate a granola bar from the vending machine and thought about the 11 minutes and the folding chair and the cheese sandwich she never got to eat. He called his mother from the hallway. She's fine, he said first, before anything else, because Vera had a tendency to catastrophize, and he didn't want her to do that in the dark, alone, on Christmas Eve. She's stable. She converted on her own. There was a long pause on the other end, not the catastrophizing kind, the other kind, the kind where Vera was measuring something. Arthur, she said, I need you to listen to me without getting defensive. He leaned against the wall. Okay, you can't keep doing this on your own. Mum, I know you're going to tell me you have a system. I know you're going to tell me it's working. Her voice was quiet and steady the way it got when she'd already decided something. But you were in the basement, and she was on the floor. He didn't say anything. I spoke to your brother, Vera said. Arthur closed his eyes. His brother, Colin Flemming, was 41, 2 years older than Arthur, and lived in Calgary with his wife and 3 teenagers and a job in oil and gas project management that paid extremely well and required frequent travel. He and Arthur got along in the way brothers who had nothing in common sometimes managed, affectionately, at a distance, with a shared history that still meant something even when the present didn't overlap much. Colin called on birthdays. He sent generous gifts to Cora. He was not someone Arthur would have thought to call. You called Colin, Arthur said. He called me. I mentioned the situation a few weeks ago. Apparently he's been thinking about it. He wants to come at New Year's. He wants to see Cora and he wants to talk to you. About what? About helping. About options. Another pause. He has an idea. Arthur looked through the small window in the hospital room door. Cora was asleep on her side, her orange fleece blanket, the one she'd insisted on bringing, tucked up to her chin. The monitor beside her bed drew its slow green line. He doesn't need to fly out here, Arthur said. He already bought the ticket, Vera said. He bought it this morning. Colin Flemming arrived on the 28th of December on a WestJet flight from Calgary and stood at Arthur's kitchen table with his coat still on and said, I want to come back. Arthur was making coffee. He turned around. Back where? Here, Ontario. Colin pulled out one of the chairs and sat down. He was bigger than Arthur remembered. Not heavier, just more solidly present the way certain people get in their 40s. He had the same gray starting at the temples that their father had had, which Arthur found strange to look at. The company has a regional office in Vaughan. I've been in conversations with them for about a year about moving into a different role. Less travel, more project oversight. It's a lateral move, but the compensation is comparable. Lindsay's been wanting to be closer to her parents anyway. They're in Sudbury. Arthur set the coffee down and sat across from him. You're talking about relocating. I'm talking about being 40 minutes away instead of 3,000 kilometers away. Colin looked at him directly, which was a Colin thing. He'd always been a direct looker, even as a kid. Mum can't be your backup right now. You're stretched too thin. You almost lost Cora yesterday. I didn't almost. 11 minutes, Arthur. You were in the basement. The words landed the way words from a sibling sometimes did. Not cruelly, but with a precision that a stranger couldn't have managed because a stranger wouldn't have known where to aim. Arthur picked up his coffee cup and put it down without drinking from it. It wasn't negligence, he said. It came out quieter than he meant. I know that. She's had this condition her whole life. We have protocols. I know. Colin's voice didn't change. I'm not blaming you. I'm saying you're one person and she needs more than one person, and I want to be one of those people. I want to be her uncle who lives close enough to come when something happens. I want to know her. He paused. I've missed 3 years of her growing up because of how I had my life arranged. That was a choice I made. I'm making a different one now. Arthur looked at the surface of the table for a moment. There were coffee ring stains on it from years of mornings. He'd refinished that table himself the first summer in the house, sanding it down to the grain and restaining it dark walnut, and the rings were back within a month because that was what happened with tables. Lindsay's on board with this? He asked. She suggested it. Outside the kitchen window, the snow was coming down again, slow and purposeful, covering the backyard in another layer of white. Cora's snow boots were by the back door, orange with a stripe, still muddy from before the hospital. She'd be awake soon. She'd been asking for scrambled eggs all morning. Arthur thought about the granola bar from the vending machine. He thought about the green line on the monitor. He thought about 11 minutes and 40 seconds and the sound of his own socks on the front porch, and how absolutely, utterly useless he had felt standing there with the phone in his hand and the snow coming down. She loves scrambled eggs, he said. It didn't make sense as a response to what Colin had said. He said it anyway. Colin looked at him for a moment, then something in his face shifted. Not into a smile, not quite, but into something adjacent. I know, he said. Ulster, she told me on the phone last week. She said you make them wrong. Arthur almost laughed. He got most of the way there. I make them fine, he said. She said you put too much cheese. There's no such thing as too much cheese. Colin leaned back in the chair and the two of them sat quietly for a moment, which was something they'd learned how to do at some point in their 30s. The comfortable quiet that took a while to develop with someone, that you didn't get with people you'd only just met, only with people who'd been there long enough. "I'm not asking you to stop being her father," Colin said finally. "I'm asking you to let me help be her family." Arthur thought about his mother's voice on the phone. He thought about what it had cost her to make that call, to admit that she couldn't be what she'd been. Vera Flemming was not a woman who asked for things easily. She'd raised two boys largely on her own after their father got sick. She'd worked the whole time. She didn't say "I need" unless she meant it, and what she'd said wasn't even "I need." It was "you need," which was harder for her. He thought about Cora asleep with the orange blanket. He thought about how small she had looked on that kitchen floor. "She's going to ask you 1,000 questions," Arthur said. "About Calgary, about the mountains. She's in a phase? A mountain phase? A geography phase. She got an atlas for her birthday." He finally drank his coffee, which had gone lukewarm. "She can name every province and territory. She'll quiz you." "I'll study up," Colin said. "She'll know if you get it wrong. I'll study hard." Arthur set the cup down. He rubbed the side of his safe face with one hand, felt the stubble from the days he'd stopped paying attention to, the particular texture of the last week of December. The house was quiet in the way houses were quiet at 8 in the morning with snow falling outside. He could hear the furnace. He could hear the clock in the hallway. "You'd have to find a place," Arthur said. "In Barrie, if you want to be close. Market's not bad right now." Colin didn't say anything. He just waited because he had always been a better waiter than Arthur. "I'm not doing this because I can't manage," Arthur said. "I know. I'm doing it because she should have more people." "I know that too." Arthur stood up and went to the counter to get the eggs out of the fridge. He cracked 4 into a bowl and reached for the cheese without thinking about it. Because he always put cheese in them and they were always fine, and heard Colin make a small sound behind him that might have been a laugh. "Don't say anything," Arthur said. "I didn't say anything. You were going to. I was going to say nothing whatsoever." Arthur whisked the eggs. The snow kept falling. Down the hall he heard the soft thud of small feet hitting the floor. Cora, awake, moving toward the bathroom, the predictable shuffle of her morning routine that he knew so precisely he could set a clock by it. He listened to each footstep and felt the particular way the house changed when she was moving through it, the way it became something different than just a house. He heard her stop outside the bathroom. He heard her door open instead. "Dad?" Her voice was hoarse from sleep, slightly raspy from the oxygen tube they'd had on her at the hospital, but present. Fully present. "Is Uncle Colin here?" "I saw his bag. He's in the kitchen," Arthur called back. A pause, then, "Does he know about the provinces?" "He says he's been studying." Another pause, longer, the kind where she was calculating something. "He better have," she said. And then her feet moved down the hall toward them. Colin looked at Arthur across the kitchen. Arthur looked back. He thought about 11 minutes, and he thought about what it meant to ask for help, about the difference between needing rescue and choosing to not be alone, about how those things had felt identical to him for a long time, and were only just now, still standing at his kitchen counter with cold eggs and too much cheese, starting to seem like different things entirely. He turned back to the stove. Cora came around the corner in her orange socks, the atlas tucked under her arm like she'd grabbed it on the way, and she looked at her uncle, sitting at the kitchen table, and said, without preamble, the way 8-year-olds did everything, "What's the capital of Nunavut?" Colin looked at Arthur. Arthur looked at the eggs. "Iqaluit," Colin said. Cora pointed at him like he'd just passed a very important test. "Okay," she said. "You can stay."